Okay, right, let's get started. Today is all about Thor. A lot of you will be familiar with Thor, at least in some ways, because of the new Marvel films. But the original Thor maybe isn't quite so impressive. I mean, it depends how you look at impressive. Um, but Thor, in the two stories we're going to have today, these come from the old Norse uh, set of stories and sagas. And these two stories today really do show what Thor is like. Thor is cool. Thor is impressive. But Thor isn't the brightest of things. Yeah, he definitely has some limitations. Maybe not so much in strength, but in mental fortitude, perhaps. So we're going to have a look at at some stories to do with Thor today. Before we jump into him himself, though, I thought I'd better just give a rough little overview of the world that Thor lives in. And we haven't really got time to go into each and every part of this, but here is Yggdrasil, the world tree. I'm going to try and fit it on the screen. Let's see if we can get that fitting a bit better. Something like that. Now, Yggdrasil is the tree of the universe, if you like, and attached to it are 9 realms. And these realms are home to different creatures or different groups. And some of them are nice places to be, some of them are not such nice places to be. But the important places that we need to know about would be probably the most important to us. Midgard, the Middle Land. That's where the humans live. That's here, basically. Yeah. Oh no, Eliza is telling me I'm saying Yggdrasil wrong. I don't know. Ooh, I'm not a Viking. That's the problem. um, now, so Midgard is where the humans live. That's where we live. But there are other worlds too. Usually we cannot get there, but the gods can certainly pass from one to the other. So Asgard here is where one group of gods live, the Aesir, and that is the group that Thor is part of. So he lives above the human world, but he can go to other places. The place where both our stories are going to take place in today is down in Jotunheim, which is where the Jotun live, or the giants. So giants are going to be the enemies, if you like, or the things that are working against Thor in our stories today. And so Jotunheim is this cold, icy place. I mean, you can see it behind me. And it's filled up with, wide areas of not much, glaciers, mountains, snow as far as you can see. But then interspersed around Jotunheim, there are many castles, huge buildings with huge fortifications, which are lived in by the Jotun. Now, some Jotun are just out and out nasty. They just want to eat people and things, and they're just not very kind. Whereas others are far more amiable, or amicable, sorry, and are far more pleasant. They're all a bit rough and ready, though. You probably wouldn't want to go and hang around with the Jotun for too long, because you could probably get, well, for a start, you might get stepped on by accident because they have very big feet. They might also decide to eat you as a snack. Now, there are other realms. We've got the realm of the elves and the dwarves. We've got Hel, which sounds pretty bad, as you can imagine. We've got Muspelheim and Niflheim, the land of fire, the land of ice. We've got Vanaheim, where the Vanir live, which are another sort of type of or family of gods. But the whole lot of these worlds are held together by the world tree, Yggdrasil, and Yggdrasil should be kind of peaceful, but it's not. There's always lots of suffering going on and lots of difficult times. And that's because at the bottom of the tree, we have our great big snake. And at the top of the tree, we have our eagle. And between them run our squirrel here, Ratatosk. Now, this cheeky little squirrel, he runs up the tree and starts telling our eagle up here all the terrible things that the snake has said about him. The snake hasn't said anything terrible about him. They've never really met. But the squirrel likes to cause an argument, so the bird gets very agitated, and then the squirrel runs back down the tree and tells the snake all the terrible things that the eagle has said about him, which the eagle has not said because, well, why would he? And so the two animals are constantly kept in this state of frustration and panic and grumpiness. So the snake is wiggling around, the eagle is beating its wings, and that means that the tree, which holds all of the universe, tends to rock about, and yeah, it's not such a stable place to live, unfortunately, all because of that cheeky squirrel. Hmm. Um, the rainbow, asked Loki. The rainbow is the bridge that only the finest warriors take. So that is the bridge that leads to Valhalla, which, if you die in battle as a true Viking warrior, you do the manly thing, roar, then you get taken away by the Valkyrie, you get dropped at one end of the Rainbow Bridge, and you walk across the Rainbow Bridge into Valhalla, an eternity of drinking and fighting and drinking. There you are. That's the Viking idea, or one of the Viking ideas of heaven, I suppose. Um, Oh, what's the deer? The deer here, I think, represents the cow that began the world, because this whole world was just covered in ice once upon a time, until the fires of Muspelheim started to melt some of the ice of Niflheim, and out of that ice sprang a cow, and the cow went around and started licking all the icebergs with its great big rough tongue and all the glaciers, until it licked clear all the gods, and so the gods could then start moving around. Well, no, in fact, the Jotun first, and then the gods had to come and fight the Jotun after they got licked out of their ice cubes. So there you go. So quite an important cow. But Princess Agatha doesn't like cows. Not even ginormous world-beginning cows? It's a bit special. My background is Jotunheim. I don't know what the exact name of the picture is, but I just had a search for Jotunheim, and this is an artist representation of that. I see, with a great big Jotun palace in the background. Quite like it. Okay, so that's a very quick guide of where Thor is living. He's up in Asgard, but the groups of gods and Jotun, they can move around. They don't just stay in their world. We do. We're stuck in Midgard, at least until we die. But Thor, being one of the Aesir, he can go around pretty much wherever he likes. And in both our stories today, he's going to find himself in Jotunheim, being a bit foolish. But we'll see. So, let's take a look at Thor himself. Now, we need to know a few things about Thor. Number one, he's a war god of war, but also of thunder. And he has some special equipment that makes him, the proper Thor. Some of these you see in the Marvel films, and some of them you don't. So probably his most famous is Mjolnir. I probably say that terribly, but Mjolnir is his great big hammer. His hammer which hits with the fury of a lightning bolt. His hammer which can, smash asunder pretty much anything. It's a really big magical hammer. Some myths say that he can throw it and it will come right back to him like a boomerang. Ooh. He's also got a mitten made of iron. Iron mitten. Now his iron mitten means that he has super strength, and that's what allows him to hold his hammer and use it to its best ability. But even that isn't enough to really give Thor his power, because where his real strength comes from is his magic belt of strength. Now, if you took away his belt, his hammer, and his mitten, he would be pretty tough. I mean, he'd still beat any human in a fight for sure. But once he has all of his equipment on, his hammer, his mitten, and his belt, then he is now strong enough to, bring down mountains. Whoa. Yes, and Orla, he is very similar to Zeus as well. This is true. Zeus being the god of thunder. So there are definitely similarities there. Now, Thor, though, unlike Zeus, is not the king of the gods. He isn't the leader. He's kind of the muscle man. He's the guy who protects the gods physically from attacks from the Jotun and other great big monsters. So without him, the other gods would be in real trouble. The king of the gods is called Odin. So there you go. Things now, I don't know what the background is called specifically. Jotunheim is what I typed in. Yeah. Loki is telling me that we pronounce his hammer Mjolnir. Mjolnir. I like it. Yes. Rowan can hear thunder. Now, of course, if you're a super god of strength, and vitality, you also need a pretty impressive ride. You know, you can't just go walking around on your feet. So Thor has a cart that is pulled by two billy goats. I don't think they put that in the Marvel movies for some reason. They're missing a trick, because everyone, of course, wants to ride around on a cart pulled by billy goats, don't they? That's pretty cool. Now, unfortunately for Thor, in both our stories today, he's not going to be able to use his billy goat cart, but it's good to know that it's there, and it does feature in one of our stories at least. So, that's Thor. Big, angry, really tough, magical equipment to make him so strong, and a billy goat cart. I like him already. So let's get into one of his myths. Now, the first myth we're going to have today, and again, I'm sorry about my pronunciation. If you're out there and you are from the Nordic world, you're probably going to think that my pronunciation is particularly bad. Princess Agatha thinks that it's only impressive in a sarcastic way. That's a shame. I think it's quite impressive. I mean, they're probably really aggressive billy goats. Probably not your normal run-of-the-mill billy goats, are they? So our story today features a Jotun called Geirrod, which is represented here, although we don't exactly know what the Jotun look like. So as you'll see as we go through today, there are lots of different types and styles of pictures of Jotun that I've tried to find. Just to give you an idea, some of them look pretty human, but huge. Others of them look a bit more monstrous, like this guy. I like this picture because of his blue skin, kind of goes with Jotunheim, that icy blue color. Our story today, though, doesn't start with Thor. It starts with Thor's half-brother, Loki. And I've got a picture of Loki here. Because normally, Loki looks like some guy, you know? But at the start of this story, he's got a bit bored, has Loki. Loki is the god of tricks. He's a bit like Anansi, if you were here last week for the Anansi stories. Anansi, of course, is a trickster god from Africa. Loki is very similar, but he's a trickster god from Scandinavia. And at the start of our story, Loki has turned himself into a falcon, this bird here, because he's a bit bored and he wants to go to Jotunheim to spy on the Jotun. In particular, this guy, Geirrod. Now, he flies then all the way to Geirrod's great big castle, a bit like the one behind me probably, and he sneaks in and he starts to, look around and flap about, having a good old spy on these Jotun. And there, in the palace, there's this whole great big group of Jotun, all sort of gathered around, feasting and eating and stuff. It's really hard to get across just how big these guys are, but to give you a basic idea, they are way bigger than a falcon. Yes, Loki is like a standard-sized falcon in this story. The Jotun tower over such things. The Jotun tower over people and Thor, because the gods are generally seen as human-sized. So the Jotun are huge, but the gods are just like, well, you and me, basically. I mean, Thor's a big human, don't get me wrong, but they're not far off. So Loki's flapping around in there, and Loki looks down and sees all this wonderful food laid out in the castle. Yes, and decides that he would quite like to go and eat some of the food. So he flaps down, and steals a little morsel here, and then flies back up into the air. But Loki thinks he's being clever because he's just a falcon, and none of the Jotun will recognize him. But the Jotun aren't stupid. They're big and they're brutish, but they're not stupid. And Geirrod, sees this falcon and can sniff the magic on him. He knows that this is not a real falcon. So, at first, the Jotun ignore Loki as he comes down. He steals little bits of food and flies away again, up to the rafters of the castle to eat the food. And of course, Loki thinks that he's getting away with this, and he's being very clever. So he starts getting more and more bold. He keeps coming down, taking a slightly bigger bit of food. Maybe he takes a bit of food that's slightly closer to the Jotun, and just munch, munch, munch he goes. Now he flies down one particular time pretty close to Geirrod. And Gyrod just reaches out his hand quick as a snake and grabs hold of Loki and stuffs him into a pot, puts the lid on top. Ha ha! He's caught a god. Now, Loki is in a right old state because he's now been put into a pot by a great big Jotun giant. And he starts to panic and flutter around and beat his wings. And Gyrod, how big is the pot? Not very big. No, not very big at all. I mean, I suppose it's probably bigger than a human pot because this is for Jotun, of course. So he can flap around in there, but it's not where Loki wants to be. So Gyrod shouts into the pot, "I know it's you, Loki. I'm going to eat you up. I quite like the taste of falcon, and I quite like the taste of God as well, and I think you'll probably like the best of both." Now, Loki is far too clever to be eaten by a Jotun, far too tricksy. And so Loki starts to say, "Hang on, why would you want to eat me? I don't taste very nice at all. You know what? You know who does taste nice? Thor. Thor tastes nice. I bet you'd like to eat Thor, wouldn't you?" Gyrod says, "Yeah, I would like to eat Thor. Yeah, I've always wanted to eat him. He's horrible." And so Loki says, "Well, if you let me go, I promise, absolutely promise, that I will bring Thor back here and he can eat and you can eat him." Gyrod says, "There's no way I'll be able to eat Thor. He's too powerful with his magic belt and his magic hammer and his magic mitten and his billy goat chariot." But Loki says, "Oh no, if you let me go, I promise I will get him back here without any of his weapons or equipment or his billy goats even." So Gyrod thinks about this. He does agree that probably Loki doesn't taste as good as a Thor, and so he agrees to the deal. "Go on, Loki. Go and get Thor back here, and then I will let you live." So he opens up the pot, out flies Loki all the way back to Azirheim, where he then goes and has a little feast. He doesn't go straight to Thor. He turns back into a human and he eats as much food as he possibly can until he is visibly full up. You know, his belly is poking out. He looks like he's just eaten a massive feast because he has. Just not at Jotunheim, of course. And he goes to Thor. And Thor says, "Ooh, you're looking kind of fat today, Loki. What have you been doing?" And Loki says, I've been to Jotunheim. I've been to the castle of Gyrod. You know what, Thor? We always thought that those Jotun were really bad guys, big monsters, but I found out today they're not. They invited me in. They gave me a huge feast. I mean, just look how much I've eaten. I am so full up." And Thor says, "Well, do you think I could go? Because I love eating." And it's true, Thor does love eating. He loves eating, he loves drinking, he loves fighting, he loves his billy goats. And other than that, that's pretty much it. He's a simple kind of guy. And Loki says, "Sure, I'm sure. I mean, these Jotun, they're really kind, especially this guy Gyrod. He will give you loads of food. I'm sure he'd love to entertain you and feed you up." Thor grabs his gear, just goes to jump into his billy goat chariot and head off to Jotunheim. But Loki says, "Whoa, slow down, Thor. You can't be going right now. You can't be going like that, all dressed up like a warrior. That's no good at all. You're going to have to leave your weapons behind, leave your mitten behind, leave your magic belt behind, because look, if you go there in your billy goat chariot looking like the war god, no one is going to think that you're there just for a feast, and you're probably going to start a war or something. They're never going to feed you if they're scared of you, are they?" Thor thinks this through. His two brain cells, they sort of rotate around in his empty skull, and he thinks, yes, okay. Yeah, that's actually quite a good argument you got there, Loki. I don't want to scare anyone, and I do want a lot of food. So he takes off his mitt, he takes off his magic belt, he takes his hammer and puts it in the corner, and he leaves his billy goats behind, and him and Loki, they walk off to Jotunheim, completely defenseless. Oh, Thor. Oh, silly Thor. Thor does sound a little bit stupid, doesn't he? But it's all right. Because Thor, in this picture, he has his hammer, but he shouldn't really. Thor and Loki. It's a long way to Jotunheim, especially if you haven't got a chariot as normal, or you're not a falcon like Loki was the last time. So it's a long walk, and on their way, they stop off at the home of one of Thor's relatives, one of these other goddesses. And she asks them, she lets them in, gives them a bit of a snack, all this kind of stuff. That I imagine they have a nice drink together or whatever. And she says, "Where are you headed?" Now they say, "We're going to Jotunheim. We're going to have a feast. It's going to be brilliant." But this goddess, she doesn't really believe this story. She knows the Jotun, and she also knows that Loki is a great big trickster. So whilst Loki isn't listening, she pulls Thor to one side and she says, "You need to go alone. Leave Loki behind because he's going to cause you trouble. Also, don't trust these Jotun. I don't think they're just going to give you a feast." And so she gives Thor some useful stuff. She gives him her magical staff, which isn't quite as impressive as a magical hammer, but it's still pretty good. It's a great big long stick with magic in it. Ooh. And she also gives him her own iron mitten and her own magic belt of strength, which he hides in his coat. Now, he says to Loki, "I think I'd better go alone. You look like you're quite fat already. I don't think you need a feast." And to be honest, Loki is quite happy to be given an excuse to go home because Loki doesn't want to go back to Jotunheim. Loki doesn't want to be eaten by the giants. And so he says, "Fine, fine, you go by yourself. It's a bit selfish of you, Thor, to go and eat the entire feast all on your own. But I suppose I have had a feast already. Yes, you go. It's fine. I'll just go back home." And Thor heads out with his magic staff, with his mitten and his belt, or at least the other goddess's mitten and belt, hidden in his cloak where no one can see them. So, as Thor gets into Jotunheim and he's getting towards the castle, he has to cross a river. And as he steps into the river, which is quite icy cold and difficult to cross anyway, all of a sudden, as he's crossing, the water in the river starts to get higher and higher and faster, and Thor can barely keep his balance. Now he puts the staff in the ground ahead of him and uses it to hold on to as the water rises, first up to his chest, then up to his shoulders, then up to his chin. Oh, he's nearly going to be swept away. But he pushes himself and he uses his magic staff that he's borrowed to pull across the water, and eventually he gets out just in time. Now, as he gets out, he looks back and he sees that the water has grown so high because extra water is being added by Jarp, or Yarp, I suppose we should pronounce her, one of the daughters of the Jotun. And she's there just filling the river with water, making it higher and higher. Poor Thor was nearly drowned. It was a good job he had his magic staff. Now, he's got across the river. The daughter Jotun is probably quite grumpy, but off he goes, and he sights the castle of Geirrod ahead of him. And to be honest, it looks pretty empty. There's no guards around. He can't see any Jotun at all, in fact. It's just this great big castle with a wide open door. And so he goes into the castle, looks around. There's a lot of food there. It looks like quite the feast, in fact. But other than that, it's kind of empty. There's only one chair and a great big table full of food. So Thor thinks, well, I don't think anyone would mind if I just started a feast on my own. I mean, Loki did say that Geirrod was really nice Jotun and that he likes feeding people. So I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I just sat down and had a bit of a nibble on my own. I mean, I have walked a long way and I did have to cross that river. Yes, Eliza. The purple guy does look a bit like Thanos, doesn't it? Yes, but that's Geirrod, at least another representation of Geirrod. So Thor sits down on the chair, nice and comfy, starts to eat. Num num num. Now, as he's eating, at first he doesn't quite notice this, but as he's eating, the chair starts to rise up. he starts to move upwards. Probably the first thing that Thor notices is that the food's a bit harder to grab because, well, it seems to be further away. But then it keeps on going up, and suddenly he realizes that something is very wrong here. The chair is going up and up and up. Loki asks, how old is the daughter of Geirrod? I don't know. I mean, all these guys are pretty old. The Jotun, they live for a very long time, so we can assume that that she's old. But exactly how old, I don't know. No, very old, I imagine. Um, so up and up and up the chair goes, and it doesn't seem to show any sign of stopping. It just pushes further and further towards the ceiling of Geirrod's castle, until Thor is at real danger of being just squished like a bug between the chair and the ceiling. So Thor thinks relatively quickly, and he pulls out his staff. Now, he puts on his iron mitt, he clasps his belt together, a bit like a seatbelt, I guess, as he's going up and up and up and up towards the ceiling. And he gets his staff, and he puts his staff up to the ceiling. No problem, Ahmed. It's good that you could join us. He puts his staff up to the ceiling, and he starts to push back against the chair. And slowly at first, the chair starts to sink back down. And then there's a terrible cracking sound. Crack. And a squealing sound. And the chair plummets back down to the earth. Rebecca asks, could he not just get off the chair? No, I don't know why. He didn't think about that. Now, when he gets back down to the ground, he realizes that his chair was being lifted by two more of Geirrod's daughters, these huge giantesses. They were there underneath his chair, one on either side, and they were just standing up and pushing the chair into the ceiling to squash him. And him, with his magical staff, has pushed back so hard that both of their backs have snapped, which is that terrible cracking noise. And that squealing was them wailing in pain. And there they are on the floor. They thought they were going to turn Thor into ceiling jam, and instead they've had their backs broken. It's all gone terribly wrong for them. Now, it's at that moment that this plan has now failed. They've failed to squash Thor, that out come the other Jotun, including Geirrod. And Geirrod is incredibly angry and starts to roar and attack Thor. Not only has he escaped the watery death of his first daughter, he's now actually hurt his other two daughters, and that does not make him happy. So he goes to the fire, and he picks up a great big ball of flame, a fireball. Ooh. I don't know what Geirrod's other daughters' names are. The first was Yalf. That was the one who filled the water, but I don't know the name of the other two. I didn't look. Maybe you can look that up, Loki. He picks up this great big fireball, and he throws it at Thor. Now Thor dodges away, and it sort of hits the ceiling above him. But Thor knows that he cannot dodge these things for long, because these are huge, giant-sized fireballs. So Geirrod picks up another one and throws it at him again. Just before he's incinerated, Thor manages to roll out of the way. And then he realizes that he has on his iron mitt, his mitt of power, mitten of glory. And so, when Geirrod throws a fireball a third time, just like some kind of cricketing superstar, Thor puts out his mitt and catches the fireball. And he pulls his arm back, and he throws it right back at Geirrod. It hits Geirrod right in the chest and burns right through him, and Geirrod collapses onto the floor. Now, Thor is now surrounded by Jotun. Not very happy Jotun at that. So, only pausing very briefly to pick up a couple of pies and maybe a steak, Thor runs out of the door, away from the castle, over the river again, and out of Jotunheim, back to Midgard. Oh, that was a close one, he thinks. Now, he's pretty angry at Loki, because Loki has got all this wrong. Silly Loki. Loki thought that he would have a feast, but instead the Jotun had tried to kill him. So, Thor and Loki, they're not the best of friends for a little while, but Thor can't stay angry at people forever. I mean, he is a pretty angry god, but he generally forgives people after a while, and, well, they'll be ready for another adventure, I guess. Um, Oh, Ahmed says which one is Gerard? So this here is the big Jotun, or a representation of the Jotun. We've seen a couple of pictures of him. There's his daughter Yarp, and then over here there's another representation of Geirrod as well. We don't really know what these Jotun look like. We know that they're very big. Yes. Abby says it's a mistake anyone can make. Quite right. So, let's see what else Thor is up to. Here we go. So here we need a few more characters. Oh, Loki asks, who is the king of the Jotun? Well, the Jotun seem to have their own kingdoms. So Geirrod is definitely the king of his castle. But in this next one, we're going to meet another Jotun called Utgards Lucky. Utgards Lucky? I'm going with that. And he is another one of these important Jotun. He has a great big castle, but also loads of other Jotun that live with him in the castle, and he is their king. I don't know if there's one particular king of all of the Jotun, not as far as I know. Yes, Orla, I'm recording this, so you can watch back later if you want to. Yes, and it'll be up on YouTube and in the folder whenever you want to see it. Yeah. So, this story starts off with a bit of a problem. Loki's in it again, and Thor, they decide that they want to take a trip to Jotunheim. They have heard that there is a Jotun there, Utgards Lucky, who is incredibly boastful. This Jotun thinks he's better than everyone. He thinks he's the best Jotun. He's not a particularly dangerous Jotun, but he does like to show off and he does like to brag. And he's been bragging that he is stronger, tougher, better than Thor. And Thor doesn't like that kind of thing. He gets quite cross when people start saying that they are better than him, even if you are a enormously huge Jotun. So, Thor is determined, with Loki, to go and prove that Utgards Lucky is nowhere near as powerful as him. I'll show him, thinks Thor. And so, Thor and Loki jump into the billy goat cart, and off they go. Now, it's a long journey, again, and just before they get to Jotunheim, they stop off at the house of a farmer. He's just a normal kind of guy, he's not special in any way. And the two of them knock on the door and ask if they can be let in and given food, and the farmer is kind enough to say, sure, you can. And so they go into this little farmer's cottage, and they sit down and they're waiting for some food, and then they look around and they realize that actually this farmer's kind of poor. He's got a couple of kids, Jalfi and Roksva, a son and a daughter. Jalfi is the boy, and Roksva is the girl. But there isn't much food to share around, so it's not going to be much of a meal for poor old Thor and Loki. So Thor says, don't worry. What we'll do is we'll eat my billy goats. Yes, we will. I'll kill them. We'll eat them. You can eat as much food as you like, guys. You farmer that's let us in, you've been so kind. You deserve a goat feast, and me and Loki will eat them. Just one thing, you're not allowed to break any of the bones of the goats. It's really important, okay? We can eat all the skin, we can eat all of it, just don't break the bones. It's really, really important, okay? So, they sit there and they have this wonderful feast. It's probably the biggest feast that this peasant family has ever had. They've probably never tried magical billy goat before. MB Shadow Girl is shouting, no, it's okay, don't worry. Because Thor, he knows his billy goats. He knows that his billy goats don't mind being eaten. Now, they're having this feast, and all of the meat gets eaten up, and all that's left is the bones. And everyone remembers, don't break the bones, this is fine. And so Thor and Loki, they go to sleep in, their peasant beds. But the farmer, he looks at those bones and he can't stop thinking about how nice the marrow would taste inside a billy goat bone. And so he takes just one bone and he cracks it in two, sucks out the marrow. It is very nice, and he hopes that no one will notice. Now, the next morning, Thor and Loki wake up, And Thor grabs together all the goat bones, we can imagine he's done this a few times, and he taps them with his hammer, and boom, they're back into live living goats again, as if nothing had happened. See, I told you not to worry. I told you. Yeah. And because the bones were all there, the goats are absolutely fine. Princess Agatha knew it. Knew it wouldn't be too bad. Yes. Now, I say completely fine. One of the billy goats is limping a bit, because one of the billy goats has got one broken bone in his leg, and of course that was the one that the farmer broke. So now Thor has got a cart pulled by one working billy goat and one who's a bit lame. He can't move, or at least not so well, not well enough to pull two gods in a cart. So Thor gets pretty angry. He says, "Who broke the bone? Who's hurt my billy goat?" And of course the farmer admits that it was him. He's really sorry. And Thor is about just to smash him in the head with his great big hammer, when Loki stops him. He says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, Thor, no. No, no, no. What we'll do is we'll leave the billy goats here. I'm sure that they will heal up fine, or this one billy goat will. The farmer, as punishment, will have to look after our billy goats whilst we're gone and make sure they're nicely fed and nicely looked after, and that bone heals properly." The farmer agrees. Also, says Loki, "We're going to take your kids. They can be our servants on our next adventure. We'll bring them back. You can have your kids back when you've fixed our billy goat. But for now, we could do with a couple of servants on the road to help us out. And yeah, we're gonna take those. All right. So this is our picture here. Then we have Thor in the lead. We've got Loki back here, and then we've got Yarfi, and we've got Roksva. And they're going to set out on foot because the billy goat cart is laid up at the farmer's house. Off they go to prove to the Jotun Utgards Lucky that they are the most powerful, or at least Thor is the most powerful. So they take quite a long journey, and it takes days and nights to get there. One night, everyone's completely worn out, completely tired, and they just need somewhere to sleep. And it's getting very, very dark. They can't really see very clear in front of them. And they come to this great big cave. It's a really warm cave. It's a surprisingly soft cave. And the four of them go in, and they sort of hunker down. They get out their roll mats or whatever they're sleeping on, and they snuggle down in this great big warm cave. But to be honest, it's not a very good night's sleep, because there's this horrible noise all night. It's really noisy. And yes, the cave is nice and warm, but it's a right old noise. Now, when they wake up in the morning, Thor's the first to wake up, and he steps out of the cave and he looks around him, and he sees there's this huge Jotun asleep on the ground, this guy here. And it wasn't a cave that they were sleeping in at all. They realize we've been sleeping in the glove of this giant. That gives you an idea of how big this guy is. Now, the giant wakes up, and he seems to be in a pretty good mood. He sees the four travelers, and he's got a great big feast in his bag, and the travelers are feeling pretty hungry, and he starts to just munch all this food. Yum, 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 yum. Thor and Loki go to him and say, "Hello, who are you? Can we have some food?" Now, it turns out this guy is called Skrymir, Skrymir, we'll go with that. Skrymir says that, well, actually, I've only got enough food for me right now, but you could have some later when I've finished. And so he eats his great big feast, and poor Thor and Loki and the children, they eat some scraps that they've still got with them. And Skrymir asks them, "Where are you going?" "Well, we're going to the castle of the local Jotun. We're going to test our strength against him," says Thor. And Skrymir says, "Cool, I'm going that way too. I'll come with you." And so together they head off. Now Skrymir picks up his great big bag of food. He tightens it tight with a rope, and he even offers to take the children's burdens, because of course they're carrying the stuff for Thor and Loki, and he takes their little bags and adds them to his own, and off they go. Now Skrymir walks with such great big strides that the rest can barely keep up with him. Luckily, Yelfi, the boy, is probably one of the fastest humans to ever live. Loki asks how old they are. We're thinking teenagers, I assume. Yeah. They're not like little kids. Maybe they're like 15, 16, something like that. Um, Old enough to be useful servants, I guess, for this adventure. Um, so Yalfi finds very little difficulty in keeping up with Skrymir, but the other three, they really have to, get on a good jog to be able to keep up, and it is a long, difficult way forwards. So eventually, they stop and pause before they get to the castle for another night's sleep, and Skrymir says, "You can help yourself to my feast if you like." And he drops down the bag of food and says, "Yeah, help yourself, I'm going to sleep." And sure enough, he falls asleep. Now, Thor goes up and tries to open the bag of food to get to the food inside, but he can't. It's completely, really, really tight. I mean, not even him with his magical belt and magical glove can open this thing. And so he goes up to Skrymir, who's fast asleep, and he smashes him on the head with his hammer. Skrymir kind of half wakes up. He says, oh, have you had a nice feast? Oh, I'm sure it was lovely. Goes back to sleep. Thor takes his hammer again and smacks him again on the head. And Skrymir half wakes up. Oh, what's right? Everything okay? Oh, you should be asleep, guys. Falls back to sleep again. A third time, and this time Thor is proper angry. I want to get into the food. He takes his hammer and he winds it up and he smacks it down as hard as he can right on the forehead of Skrymir. And Skrymir properly wakes up. Oh, what? Oh, I must have been hit on the head by an acorn or something. Oh, my goodness. You're right, guys. They say, look, we can't get into the bag. We want some food. And Skrymir opens the bag and lets them have a snack. That's okay, I suppose. It's a nice feast that they have. And the next day, after everyone's had a good sleep, they head into the castle of the Jotun. Ooh. Now, when they get there, they find that Utgards Lucky is actually quite a good guy. He's not one of these angry, I'm just going to eat you kind of Jotun. He's not like Geryod, who just tries to kill them. He welcomes them. And he's in the middle of a great big feast, because they are. Always these Jotun. And he's eating, he's drinking, he's got loads of friendly Jotun around him, and everyone's quite happy to see Thor. And Thor stands there and challenges Utgards Loki to a test to see who's the best. You've been chatting about me, says Thor. You've been saying that you're better than me. I'm here to prove you wrong. So, the Jotun says, I will challenge you all to competitions. First, an eating competition. Who will take up this challenge? Now, Loki decides that he's pretty good at eating. I mean, and he is, to be fair. He's a small guy, but he's got a big, he can pack a lot of food in there. And so he says, I will take on the eating championship, or the eating challenge. And our king of the Jotun, he calls out to another Jotun called Logi. Says, Logi, you can be in charge of the eating contest. Show this young god who's the best. And so they sit down to a great big bowl of food. And the Jotun king, he bashes down his hammer on the table and says, go! And the two of them start to eat as fast as they can. Now, Loki is incredibly fast, like really fast. He is eating a huge amount of food, like a machine. And he thinks he's doing pretty well. In fact, he gets through half the bowl of food, and then he notices that Loki, it's uncanny. He's not just eating this food. It's as if the food is just evaporating in front of him. It's going so fast. And Loki isn't just eating all the food. He's eating the bowl too. The whole thing is just disappearing into the face of this great big Jotun. And Loki has to admit defeat. He has not won this eating contest. Loki is well better. One contest lost. Next, Utgards Lucky says, it's now time for the race. We will see who's the fastest. Huggy, come here. And this other great big Jotun, who looks a bit fat and slow, to be honest, he lumbers out. And Thor says, look, Jalfi, you are the fastest. This is the young servant boy. You are the fastest here. You have the running race. And so Jalfi and Huggy, they line up and they've got to have a race around the castle. And Utgards Lucky, he bashes on the table, go! And Jalfi runs off as fast as he can, and he runs like the wind. I mean, Jalfi is really fast, possibly, as I said, the fastest human ever, faster than the gods. And he is racing around this track, but he looks forwards, and he sees that Huggy is in front of him. Huggy is really fast. He's like moving faster than the wind, if that's possible. And Huggy comes to the finish line a full 10-20 seconds before Jalfi does. And Jalfi's panting and out of breath, and, well, that's another contest that they've lost. Things are not going so well in this sporting contest, the Olympics between the Jotun and the gods. Now, it's now time, Thor thinks, well, look, obviously, these races and this eating contest, they didn't work because it's not me you're fighting, yeah? Come on, give me some tasks. And so the next contest is a drinking contest. The Jotun, they bring forward a great big drinking horn. You can see it here on our picture. A horn is just a great big cup with a long end like an animal horn, but full of liquid. In this case, strong beer. Now, Thor can drink beer all day. Thor is like the beer drinking champion. And the king of the Jotun says, look, Thor, the best of the Jotun can empty this horn in one gulp. The not-so-good Jotun, it takes them 2 gulps. My very smallest, the children Jotun, for them it takes 3 gulps. Let's see how many gulps you can empty it into. And so, Thor takes one huge drink. He drinks until he cannot hold any more liquid, until he cannot hold his breath anymore. And he swallows, and he looks into the cup, and it's pretty much as full as it was when he started. He's drunk maybe a tiny bit. The Jotun say, oh, that was a good go, Thor, well done. Maybe you'll empty it in 2 like the not-so-good Jotun do. And again, Thor takes a great big gulp, and he looks in, and it's gone down a little bit, but not much at all. Oh, and he says, sorry, I can't do it. I'm obviously not as good as drinking as I thought. Thor's confidence is knocked a little bit. But the Jotun says, don't worry, we'll give you an easier task, okay? Maybe drinking isn't your thing. Maybe strength is your thing. All you need to do is pick up my cat. And out comes a cat. I mean, it's a Jotun cat. It's a big cat, don't get me wrong, but a cat nonetheless. And so the cat very calmly just sort of stands there in the middle of the hall, and Thor goes over to it, and he puts his arms under it, and he starts to lift. But he cannot lift the cat. No, the cat is really heavy. I mean, the cat doesn't even budge an inch. It just stands there, just like... Thor puts his shoulders into it, really starts to push, and the cat starts to lift off the ground. He starts to sort of bend in the middle. Maybe one paw lifts off the ground, but nothing more than that. And Thor has to admit defeat. Maybe he's not as strong as he thought. Poor Thor. But the Jotun challenge him to one last contest. How about a wrestling match with the oldest of our number, Grandmother Ellie? See if you can wrestle her. I'm sure, Thor, that you're strong enough to wrestle an old woman, aren't you? And so Thor, he needs to prove himself. He says, bring it on. And out comes this little old lady. For a Jotun, she's pretty small. She's all wizened and bent over. She looks like she's about 1,009 years old or something. And the 2 of them, they start to wrestle. Now Thor grabs hold of the old woman, and she proves pretty difficult to move. She's kind of bendy and flexible. She keeps on getting out the way, and he can't quite grab her properly. She, on the other hand, keeps grabbing him round the chest and nearly throwing him down. Now, the more she's battling him, the angrier he gets. And Thank you, Princess Agatha. Maybe you pronounced it L instead of Ellie. Quite right. I'm not sure how the Scandinavians would pronounce their E on the end there. So they're having this great big fight. And he cannot get her down. And the more he fights, the more angry he gets, until smoke is practically coming out of his ears. He is so cross and so frustrated that he cannot beat this old woman. And then, with one quick flip of her wrists, she grabs hold of Thor and throws him down onto the ground. And Thor is lying there on his back, feeling thoroughly ashamed. The Jotun are laughing and kind of doing this kind of pathetic clap. Oh, well done. Yeah. Poor Thor. He couldn't drink the beer. He couldn't pick up the cat. He couldn't even defeat the oldest of the Jotun ladies. He must not be as good as he thought. And so, with head hung low, he, Loki, and the two children, they leave the castle, feeling kind of down about the whole thing. Very embarrassed and ashamed. It's not very good at all. Now, as they are leaving, though, as they're just about to leave the castle in the distance, up comes the king of the Jotun. He's chasing them behind. He says, "Whoa, hang on, slow down, Thor. I'm terribly sorry, but we've been tricking you. Really, you must feel like you're pretty weak, but let me tell you what you were really doing. At first, that giant that you met, Skrimnir, that was me in disguise. And you hit him on the head 3 times with your hammer and he didn't even notice. Well, that's because I fooled you, and I put a mountain in between my head and your hammer. Look at that mountain over there." And sure enough, Thor looks at this mountain in the distance, and there's 3 huge dents in it. One quite small dent from the first time he hit the giant, one quite large dent from the second time, and the third dent is, basically smashed half the mountain off. He's hit it so hard. He says, "Yeah, sorry for using magic to trick you." And as for the contests, well, Loki didn't eat the eating contest because Huggy was no normal giant, no normal Jotun. He was the spirit of wildfire itself. And of course, fire will always eat everything far quicker than a human can. So Loki feels a bit better. And he says, "You, Hjalfi, you were very fast, well done. But that Jotun you were running against, Huggy, was actually created as a thought from my head. And of course, nothing can run as fast as thought can." So Huggy feels a bit better. And Thor, you in particular, you had us a bit worried there, actually. We thought you were going to beat some of these tricks. When we asked you to drink, you didn't notice, but the end of your horn was actually connected to the oceans. And what you did was you nearly drank the oceans dry. We were a bit touch and go, actually. We thought you might actually empty the whole world of water. You drank so much. Sorry about that. Thor's feeling a bit grumpy. What's tricking us? And he says, "Well, that cat, that was no normal cat. That was actually the snake that lives at the bottom of Yggdrasil in disguise. And we thought for a second there you were going to snap it in 2. You nearly picked him up so hard. Thankfully you didn't. That would have caused all kinds of problems." Thor is getting angrier. Tricking me again. And he says, "That old woman, old grandmother El, well, that in fact was old age itself. And no man can wrestle with old age and win. Old age will throw every man eventually." Now Thor, by this point, has smoke coming out of his ears. He has been tricked 3 times at least, and he is furious. He pulls back his hammer, and he brings it sweeping towards the face of the Jotun, who just disappears into a puff of smoke. Now, Thor is pretty angry. And to be honest, Loki doesn't make it any better. The 2 of them, with the children, they head back to pick up the billy goats. And Loki just keeps joking and laughing at him the whole way, giggling and pointing and joking and laughing at Thor. And he says, "Ha, Thor, you wait until we get home. I'm going to tell all the other gods just how pathetic you are. Couldn't drink some beer, couldn't pick up a cat, couldn't wrestle an old lady. Oh, and Thor stayed pretty angry for a long time, throwing storms and thunderbolts down to the Midgard to, yes, upset the people below. So there you go. Those are some tales of Loki. Maybe not quite as cool as in the Marvel. I mean, you tell me whether you think the real Thor is better than the Marvel version. But I mean, he's pretty cool, pretty impressive stuff there. Even though, as I said, he gets tricked pretty easily. There you go. Oh, we got some people saying that these stories are better, and some people saying that Marvel is better. That's fair enough. I suppose we're going to have our own ideas. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me again, and I hope to see you all next Monday, where we'll have some more mythology. Have a wonderful week, and I hope that you all have a great week too. All right, bye-bye. Bye.